might have.
How did you come to the $1.9 billion figure?
By looking at a variety of ways, looking at what it would take to continue the programs and services that are in place today, and then giving some rough idea of what it might take to deal with those other areas that we just ticked off, dealing with the higher standards, dealing with the English language learners, et cetera, et cetera.
I asked because if I remember correctly, I think the board last year asked for 1.5, and I think NICET and some of the advocacy groups asked for 1.9, and obviously the governor and the legislature ended up delivering 1.1. So I wonder if you got the 1.9 this year, what does that mean for the following years? Will you be looking for smaller numbers, or is it the kind of thing where you'd be looking for about $2 billion every year for an unforeseen future?
Well, it depends on how they end up allocating that 1.9. If some of it went to pay for the past year's claims, that would not have to be repeated. The more success we get with investing in our teachers, in the professional development and the curriculum development, once those investments are made, that would not necessarily continue. As long as we have continuing underlying cost increases for some of the regular operations, some of that would have to be the case.
As you know, Governor Cuomo's fond of saying more money isn't the answer to better schools. Do you foresee him being an obstacle in asking for this additional money?
Well, certainly, from my point of view, that frame of reference, that view, is certainly something that has to be overcome. We're talking here about a whole number of initiatives that have been put in place and are going to be put in place. Where would they be funded from?
Can you put a number on the number of refugee students who entered New York State schools, say, in the last year, and how that's affected the finances? And I know it varies from district.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has that number.
Around 5,000.
How much?
Around 5,000.
Around 5,000. Jump up here, guys.
No.
Don't let me swim.
Yeah, and obviously it's not 5,000 students spread equally all over the state. You know, as Jim mentioned, Brentwood got 200 of these students.
I just want to follow up. You said that point of view has to be overcome. How do you folks propose to do that? And anybody else wants to step in, feel free.
Anybody want to take that? I get an answer if they. We have to deal with the state budget. We deal with both the governor. We deal with the legislature. And the fact that we're all together on that, I think, should help in that process.
Do you have any feedback from the Senate on this? I mean, the Assembly is probably, I would suspect, is on board, but do you have a feel for how this might fly in the Senate?
I do not.
Not yet. You know, we have had some meetings with legislative and executive staff, and you know, they all have to evaluate the entire budget picture, just as a school board or superintendent or school business official has to do at the local level. I will say, you know, Jessica mentioned last year the legislature and governor agreed to a budget that increased school aid by $1.1 billion, but they also did $340 million for full-day pre-K, and that is also part of what we talk about in our proposal. Again, this current year, $340 million for full-day pre-K, only 40 outside of New York City. And you know, we know that there are many upstate and downstate suburban districts that also want to take advantage of that program for their students.
How does this fit in with the CFE lawsuit? 'Cause I've heard other groups mention more money. Did this fulfill that court order finally, or are you not? So you're not even going there.
No, this
Could you answer the
1.9
Could you
is
answer the microphone, please?
the 1.9 is the increase that we've all agreed upon, but that CFE is still out there, and we'd like to see that $5 billion coming the way to the schools that it should. So,
Couldn't one argue though that would come first? I mean, that money's still outstanding, and what, let alone the 1.9 million. Couldn't you argue if you were maybe in New York City, say, well, we should at least pick away at that, because who knows when that's going to be paid?
I would love to pick away at it all.
Our report does call for returning to a predictable foundation formula, and that's essentially what that was all about, the CFE was all about, that formula.
Yeah, can I just say?
Sure.
Rick, I mean, this $1.9 billion proposal basically is a down payment on what is owed to schools. We talk about prior year aid claims that's owed to schools. We're talking about the 1.06 billion that's owed in GEA restoration that's owed to schools. We're talking about the $4.7 billion in foundation aid that was promised to schools. A lot is owed to public schools. We realize the state's finances can't, fulfill all of those promises all at once, but we believe the state is in a better financial situation today to start making a down payment, and a serious down payment, on fulfilling those promises and fulfilling those commitments to public schools. So that's where we are.
Good job. Nice. Others?
What's the next step? This seems to be the opening statement. We're 6 weeks out from the legislature.
As
How else do you ratchet up the visibility of this?
Well, you're right, it's the first step, and we wanted to make this step before all the wheels start moving toward the state budget, and hopefully have some influence with respect to even that. And then certainly work with the legislature from there. Regents will be out with a proposal soon, too. Hopefully that'll help in the process. And we'll just keep marching together along the road.
What do you think about Governor Cuomo's comments that he's going to break the last public monopoly, public schools? Obviously, that's all.
When you think about a monopoly, can you describe it as a 700 independently elected school boards across the state? Does that sound like a single threshold? And beyond that, there are how many public, private schools and other options that are available to residents today? Is that a monopoly? What's the fundamental charge? Isn't free public education provided for in our Constitution?
Well, I mean, I think he's talking about maybe having more charter schools, for example, that all the resources now, or most of the resources are going to public schools.
And
There should be other publicly funded schools, like charter schools. What about that?
by underfunding the rest of us?
If they were to,
Any comments there, guys?
if they were to come up with the 1.9 billion, would you be okay with more charter schools as well then? We're
I think-
lifting the cap.
I think it depends upon how they're funded, and I think that the charter school formula is fatally flawed. I think most of us would agree at this point in time. I'm sorry. The current funding formula for charter schools is fatally flawed. I think everyone up here would agree. And I think it depends upon how they're funded going forward, because there are serious implications to existing school districts that have reached the point of saturation.
And just, on the monopoly comment, I'd say, public schools really are institutions of, by, and for the people. Our schools are required to serve all children, whatever their circumstances, wherever they come from, whenever they arrive. That's what we're dealing with right now with these unaccompanied immigrant children. And the leadership of public schools come from the community. In my case, they're men and women I run into in church, at the grocery store, at the pizza shop, at the veterinarian's office. And I'd say public schools are more accountable than just about any other institution you can think of. Who else produces more performance data? We have school report cards, student test results, graduation rates, violent and disruptive incident reports, and we provide tremendous opportunities for public input. Cities, counties, towns, villages, the state does not put its budget up for a vote every year as all the districts outside the Big Five do. So, public schools really are charged with educating all types of children and are, tremendously accountable to the public.
Was there a sense of dismay by any of you when you heard that comment from the governor?
Yeah. That's a concerted yes.
Dismay at any type of comment that would be seen as negative. I spoke about the extraordinary success of so many schools in New York State. I think that would be something that I would speak on if I was a state leader, a state lawmaker. And when we talk about breaking things up, bad monopolies, I would think that things that we would go after are things like poverty, breaking up poverty around this state, breaking up drug rings and gang violence. These are the things that I would go after if I'm going to talk about breaking things up in this state.
But Andy, if I could just, don't want to sound like a devil's advocate here, but I think what Cuomo's
Go right ahead.
talking about is in places like Rochester or Buffalo where the schools are performing poorly and that the graduation rate is not very good, that I think he's saying that there's, that kind of monopoly should be broken up, not necessarily in the districts that are doing really well.
Well, I think what we have to do is invest more in those schools to make sure that they have the resources that they need. We've heard so much about things like social workers being put into schools where there's many social ills. And with budget cuts that a city like Buffalo has seen, and Rochester, they don't have those resources. That's where I would put the money.
Our members are not sure exactly why charter schools are seen as some sort of panacea by the governor in this regard. In terms of the last edition of the Common Core aligned 3 to 8 assessments, public schools outperformed charter schools in English language arts. And the reverse was slightly true in terms of mathematics. Charter schools somewhat outperformed normal public schools in terms of mathematics. Just like regular public schools, there are some charter schools that are very low performing, some that are kind of average, some that are higher performing. And what we're saying is, and picking up on Jennifer's point, provide equitable support to public schools so that they have an equitable opportunity to demonstrate what they and the public school students can do before you start thinking about alternatives like charter schools.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. Appreciate you coming.